everyone, and welcome back to the Black Lawyers Podcast. Today, we have the pleasure of interviewing advocate, attorney, strategist, commentator Angela Rye. Thank you so much for joining us.
It's my pleasure. Thank you for having me.
So, you may not remember, but this is actually my second time interviewing you. I have an organization called Lawyer Base that highlights young, fashionable, smart attorneys, young attorneys. And we had, I think, a graduation during COVID. And it was probably the first graduation during COVID. So they did not get to have their law school graduation, which I know when you finish law school, you want your graduation. So we did a virtual graduation for law students back in, I believe, 2020 or 2021. And Miss Rye had the pleasure of being our speaker, and she did that virtually, and she kind of did it at the last minute. So always appreciate you being willing to speak to the next generation of lawyers. And this is the Black Lawyers Podcast. We are rooting for everyone Black 365, not just during Black History Month. So we're always excited to bring on Black attorneys. As my listeners know, I make everyone play hot topics before I jump into their questions. The last few weeks, first hot topic is Miss Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett, who we actually interviewed for Women's Month back in March. She was on the House floor. If you don't know this story, Representative Marjorie Taylor Greene, who's always making waves for her comments, commented on Representative Jasmine Crockett's eyelashes. Something to the effect that maybe you can't read the paper because of your eyelashes. And of course, Representative Jasmine, who is also a Black attorney, hit her with what they're calling the B6 clapback, where she turned to the floor and asked them, if she were to call her certain names, would that be appropriate? And so we have this B6, I believe it's Beach Blonde, Bad Built, Butch Body. It's I love alliteration. I don't know if she already had that prepared, but it just came out. And so now she's actually even filed the trademark for it, and it's gone viral. My question to you is, so I looked this up right before our interview. There have only been 57 Black congresswomen, which it just is hard to think that there are only 57. But yeah, there haven't been that many, obviously, Black, congressmen, period, or congresswomen, period. So we're always going to be the minority in those spaces, just like we're the minority in the legal space, with lawyers being less than 5% being Black. Why do you think that, even because people think, well, these are our politicians. This is supposed to be Congress. There's supposed to be a certain level of decorum. Why do you think that? I don't know. It just doesn't seem like it's getting any better in terms of how sometimes our Black representatives are treated, and not just Black, because even of color, because you have AOC, you have other just women of color just being also targeted in terms of just not being respected. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, thank you so much for having me, Attorney Carter. I'm grateful to be able to share space with you. It is always a pleasure to speak to Black lawyers, lawyers of color, upcoming lawyers. It's my heartbeat. And so I'm grateful to be here with you today. Relative to Jasmine, my dear sister, Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett, who, as you said, is also an attorney, is brilliant. The way that she has been able to make politics pedestrian for young folks, make them understand the process. She tweets about what her day is like when there's no action and she thinks there should be action. She is phenomenal. And one of the things that I deeply appreciated about that moment for her is it's one that I lived out way too often on CNN, on TV commentary. It's way too often that Black women experience those same kinds of attacks at home, at work, in their neighborhood grocery store, and at school. We are in a day and age right now where it has to be legislated that we can wear our hair certain ways. Um, so it is no wonder that someone who is as ill-informed um, and seems to lack decency, Marjorie Taylor Greene would attack her. I think they were in the oversight and government reform committee room during a hearing, and actually I think it might have been a markup. I wonder, I might be merging the 2 days, but I know during that same week, because we were talking about something else, Jasmine had a bill that she was getting ready. She was preparing for markup. And I can't remember if it was that same week earlier, or if it was that same day. But what I do know is that we get to a point where enough is enough, where you have pushed the buck too much, and that's just it. And so for many of us, we felt seen in that moment because we know what the double standard is. You know, they can cry and they can, quiver their lip, and and all of a sudden we are the attack dog when in fact we were on the receiving end of the attack. So for her to say, I can't hear you over your fake eyelashes was ridiculous, because she's literally walking around as a caricature of herself every single day. Not only defending Donald Trump and Donald Trump's insurrectionist, which I call the terrorist attack on Capitol Hill, she also has threatened members of the squad. You brought up AOC earlier. At one point, she was telling Rashida and Ilhan that she was packing, that she was carrying a gun to work, to Congress every day, which she is allowed to do. She's allowed to be licensed. But also, why do you need that? What insurrection are you getting ready for, sis? Like, what's happening? So I really appreciated what Jasmine said. I'm a Christian, so I do believe we're supposed to always take the higher road. To me, that felt very high in that moment, because she could have went a lot lower. And she was using it as an example to call out what normally happens in those committee spaces on the floor, because that woman has also shown out on the House floor. And she was like, look, let's talk about what this actually is, because if I'm to give her what she gives me, she can't even handle it. And that is exactly what she proved. And the world was able to stand alongside Jasmine and say, yeah, not on our watch. We see exactly what's going on here.
Right, absolutely. It's interesting. We're so in sync when you said the thing about the
Your
parent.
something happened with the microphone. I don't know if it's
Can
on my
you
end. It's a
can you
little
still hear?
muffled.
Can you hear?
Now I can, but hopefully I wonder if did your mic turn off and maybe the
Oh
computer.
no, I think I still
Now
heard.
it sounds perfect. I don't know what happened. Okay.
No, no, I think we're in sync. Because when you said the thing about that's what I thought about. It's so interesting you said that, because we already don't look like them, right? Our skin or our hair or how we just we don't look, like the average white congressman, just like black people in an attorney space. When you think attorney, you don't necessarily think black or woman. So we get them when we come in these spaces. We don't look like them already. So, attacking someone's eyelashes, yeah, it reminded me of like the hair thing, and how there is a Crown Act still trying to be passed across all 50 states. I think they may be up to like 27 or 30 states now,
Mm.
trying to pass that where there isn't discrimination. So yeah.
You just said something that's so interesting, and I wonder if it's a point of privilege being raised with the parents that I have. But you said when you think of an attorney, you don't think of a black woman, and I'm like, yeah, I do. All I think of black people's, like my Johnny Cochran book is up here. Like that's all I think of are Michelle Obama. The mentors that I grew up around, Barbara Lahners, R.T. Young, like really Ray Connell's daddy, like there are a bunch of black attorneys I was raised around. Ben Crump, a big brother to me.
Mhm.
John Crump, who used to run the National Bar. Like, I think of black attorneys, and I am so grateful that the first thought, I was like, oh wait, I actually do. My first
No,
thought.
I think that's amazing. But what's so
Mhm.
funny? It's almost like, because I'm originally from DC, and it's almost like how I kind of say how, like, oh, there's so many black people. There's so many black people in college, because you're in DC and there are like 8 colleges right here. So you see a lot
Yeah.
of black professional women that do well. And then I've lived in California for a period of time, right? Where it's like, why would you go to law school? Why would you put yourself through all that? All those years, you passed the bar. Like, you go to other spaces and you
Hmm.
realize it's not the norm. So you're right. You're privileged in the sense that you've had that all around you. There's some people that graduate from law school, and other than maybe naming a few of these famous people, they don't. they don't have anybody that's ever even graduated from law school.
They weren't into Boston then either. Cause I was into Boston. I was at the National Bar Association convention. So I'm like, if when in a space that's as isolating and as lonely as the legal field is, like go and find your
Yeah.
tribe, go and find your folks. Otherwise, like I grew up in Seattle, ain't no Black Bastion, So, but I grew up in a neighborhood where I was surrounded by our folks, and my parents made sure that I saw Black books and Black art and had Black dolls. Like that was a very conscientious decision.
I
So
love
I like that's what I know, and I thank God for it because I was like, no, that's absolutely what I think of, and all the Black women, badass attorneys in Congress. Like I definitely am thinking of them.
no, no, no. And to be honest, that's part of the reason why we have this podcast,
Yeah,
because we want to continue to remind people that this should be the norm. When you think of an attorney, you can think of a Black woman. Like that could
yeah.
be one of the first people, or a Black man. So that's part of the reason why we have the podcast with the awareness. Which is a great transition to our last hot topic, one you know very well. A lot of Black federal prosecutors, and I know Marilyn Mosby has been a hot topic for the last couple of weeks leading up to her sentencing for her particular child. For you, those that are listening, we've talked a little bit about um, Ms. Mosby in terms of her being a former Baltimore prosecutor, how she stood on the front lines with the Tulsa survivors, George Floyd. I mean, you name it. She has just been a champion, and so it broke our heart that she was targeted in the way that she was targeted. With essentially, without breaking every single detail out in this question, but you know, using things with her own accounts, receiving transfers for her own mortgage application, being advised a certain way, not knowing that that would have been viewed as, fraud or something illegal. Just everything that was described in this complaint seems so just kind of run of the mill, very administrative, for it to turn into this whole criminal fraud thing. It was just extreme. It was just extreme. And then to know that she could face up to 40 years in jail, basically a murder sentence for something financial, made it even more extreme. And so I know you were one of the attorneys and advocates behind um, getting justice for her. And I know you guys are still seeking justice for her, but if you could just give our audience an update in terms of what her sentencing was and what is next for her, we would love to hear from you regarding that.
Yeah, I think the first thing that I would say about Marilyn, who again was the former city state's attorney in Baltimore, and she was the youngest chief prosecutor when she was elected during her first term. And at that time, no one had taken on a police department the way Marilyn did when trying to go after the officers who killed Freddie Gray. Marilyn talks a lot about having learned their lessons in those cases and figuring out how to prosecute officers in a way that would be successful. So she ended up prosecuting over 30 police officers during her tenure, as well as creating a bunch of progressive programs. I think the most important thing that I would say to you, Attorney Carter, is that it's really important to understand the facts of these cases when they're going after our folks. Marilyn is not the only one, she's the latest one. Marilyn did not do anything wrong. There was no fraudulent transfer. There was no, stealing from the people retirement funds that she didn't earn. She withdrew under a COVID provision her own money from her own retirement account. So we have to be careful even in how we read what is printed in the press. There are papers in Baltimore, the Banner, the Sun, the Capitol Record, I think it is, that all have written about this as if whatever the federal prosecutors put in their indictment was true for Marilyn, and that is not the case. I've combed over every detail of this case. I've combed over the court transcripts. I've combed over the bank statements. It is not fraudulent, nor money laundering, nor her being a drug mule to deposit for her husband $5,000 because she doesn't know if he has it, and he sends it to the mortgage company. That is not fraud. That is not fraud. And there are other things that they tried to hold her accountable for that the jury was like, yeah, no, she didn't do this. And I think what is most significant here is we're talking about $95,000. The federal government spent millions of our money. That is where our taxpayer dollars came in. Millions of taxpayer dollars, over $95,000 of Maryland's own money. And now we're paying for $1 million ankle bracelet for Maryland, and it ain't from Tiffany's. It ain't cute. It's so that they can keep her on home confinement for a year. That is the proposed sentence right now. That is what the judge decided. And then 3 years of supervised release. This couldn't come at a worse time. Marilyn's grandmother is in hospice care in Boston. This is a woman who raised her. We really believe that she was holding on through the trial for Marilyn to make sure that she was just there for her. And now her health is taking a turn for the worse. Marilyn's had to get a stay on the sentence, and now doesn't begin her home confinement, which really isn't home confinement because she can still do community service, get a job, pick up her kids, go to the grocery store, do all the things that she would normally do, but they really want to restrict travel. And they wanted to impose this sentence so that ultimately Maryland could lose her law license. Why? Because they want to send a signal to other Black progressive prosecutors who are up and coming, other young folks who are in Nebraska graduating this year, who said, you know what, I want to be an attorney like Marilyn Mosby, or like Kamala Harris, or like Kim Foxx, or like Kim Gardner, or like Rachel Rollins, who they're also going after. And maybe if they see what will happen if they decide to take that approach, never mind, because I could lose my law license and my livelihood. Maryland's only sentence wasn't house arrest, so to speak, or 3 years of supervised release. It is also the stripping of the very property that she bought. They have decided that even though this property doubled in value, is worth way more than an initial $95,000, that they should have 90% of the profit from the sale, and Maryland should get 10%. It really should be the other way around, if at all. But I maintain the fact that someone using $95,000 of their own money is not criminal. It is just not criminal. And I cannot believe the amount of taxpayer dollars wasted here when we have a former president with 88 indictments, probably should be more. 3 of them were dismissed in the Fulton County Court. We really have a lot that we need to reevaluate as a people, as a country, when our main target is someone who utilized their own money to purchase property because they're going through a divorce and they want to ensure that their children are taken care of. Our priorities are really jacked up. And while there is a whole war going on in Gaza, right? And while our folks can't afford to make ends meet, and gas prices are raising, and all of these other things are happening, and we didn't take a second look at what was happening during Donald Trump's DOJ to say some of these cases should not carry over into this new administration because we don't use, at least we're not supposed to. That building certainly is still named the J. Edgar Hoover Building, which is another podcast in itself. But if that Department of Justice actually fulfills its mission, then what we should not be doing is targeting our political enemies. What we should be doing is ensuring that justice is served, and that we do it with respect for the taxpayer dollar. And if we treated the Justice Department in that way, I can guarantee you there are a number of cases that would have never been tried, never brought to court, never brought before a grand jury, because it is a waste of time, dollars, and access. And it's an abuse of power, which is a whole other thing that should be talked about at some point, because those prosecutors on the federal level have way, way, way too much discretion.
Yeah, I mean, you said it all. You said it all. Again, even without combing every single transcript and every single bank statement, I was like, right on the surface, yeah, transferring your own money, it's just not fraud. There's no intent to deceive. I'm just sorry, the elements are just not there, just even on the surface, even before you dig in.
Yeah. But if you are before a jury and the judge. Mm-hmm.
No, I was just saying, I just don't even know how they were even able to get it to a fraud charge in the first place. It's just amazing that they even had enough to charge her. I just didn't even think it met the elements to even charge her in the first place. But
yeah,
I guess
you have to go back and look at what happened with the grand jury and what happened with the jury instructions from this particular judge. There were a number of really big flaws, and I think honestly it will be reversed on appeal. She is going through the appellate process, and most importantly, we are pursuing justice with the president. So we're asking people to still sign the petition. Some folks are like, well, why do you need to sign a petition? She didn't really get any time. Why does she need the pardon? Because her law license is on the line, because her dignity is on the line, because we're trying to send a signal to young attorneys who are up and coming that you can pursue justice and you will not be punished for it. We know what it takes for us to balance the scales of justice. Our folks have been hit hard by the criminal justice system for far too long. So we are asking folks to go to justiceformarilynmosby.com and to still sign that petition. We are very close to 100,000 signatures, and I know after this podcast drops, we will have cleared it.
Definitely. So yes, so prior to us doing your interview today, we have been promoting the petition
Yeah. Thank you guys.
and reposting it. So yes, I think some people were like, "Oh, it's over. We don't have to sign anymore." And I'm like, "No,
Yeah.
we still need signatures because we
Thank
definitely
you.
want that pardon, and we definitely just like her real estate, her law license is her property. She earned it. She went to law school. She passed the bar. This is how she
Okay.
keeps herself. Like I said, it's almost a whole nother podcast about Black people being targeted for their licenses, being suspended and put on probation. That in certain areas it's higher in certain areas that Black attorneys are targeted once they do receive a law license. And so we obviously know this is a part of what has happened here. And so yes, you can find the petition on the website that Ms. Rogers gave, but you can also find a link to it on the blacklawyers.com and also
Oh,
on
good. Thank you.
at the Black Lawyers Podcast. So you can find a link to it there. And
Attorney Carter with the advocacy. Thank you.
yes, yes, yes. No, as soon as I heard it, I was like, another one, because I was like, the thing going on with
Exactly.
Danny. And then Kristen Clark at the DOJ, like, because she didn't
Mhm.
say that she got in a fight with her husband. Oh, you lied under your confirmation.
Insane.
I'm like, what is going on? It's just like this pattern, but it's like we, even when we don't do anything wrong, it's like we have to be, this is why we have to be perfect at all times, because it's like they're
Yeah.
looking they're looking for something to take us down. So we appreciate you just kind of quickly just diving into the facts for people that did know about her case and why it's important that that petition be signed, that there's still time to get her justice. And at the end of the day, we definitely feel the numbers are the numbers. Like you said, you can't change the bank statement. So we just, at this point, we just believe the truth is going to come to light in terms of what has happened, and her reputation and her license will be restored. And will also, I know Ben Crump did a letter to Biden, but the Black Lawyers Podcast, we will also do a letter for
Ben Crump did not do a letter to Joe Biden. What we did have is 60 attorneys, mostly Black attorneys, who signed on to her pardon application, and they're all listed in the cover letter. We also have 14 civil rights organizations that called for a pardon, and the Congressional Black Caucus, and then finally Win with Black Women. Hundreds of Black women signed on to a letter also calling for her pardon.
Great, great. So again, you can find out more information on the website, find the petition also on the blacklawyers.com and also on our social media page at the Black Lawyers Podcast. Transitioning to also, while we're obviously here, we're here to bring advocacy about things going on in the world, but this interview is truly also about you, Miss Rye. Like I said, I know a little bit about you because I've interviewed you before. But for those that don't know as much about you, I like to do these dive in interviews just to talk about people's journeys. We consider folks like yourself, you're our Black superheroes. That's what I call you guys. So I like to just find out the journeys before you became who you became in terms of your path. So first question, who were you before you were all of this? Before you were a lawyer, a commentator, a strategist, uh, who were you? Where did you like grow up? What were your interests? Who were you before?
So I grew up in Seattle, Washington. I grew up with two incredible parents who I still call my road dogs to this day, Mama and Papa Rye. My mom is a retired college administrator. She has her doctorate in education. She engaged in the fight in a way that was much different than my dad's, on affirmative action commissions, trying to balance um, equitable opportunities and outcomes for students. And my father is a bullhorn, sign carrying, true and through activist, an agitator, proud agitator, he would say at that. He has been protesting as long as I can remember, and it preceded my birth. So my dad was he got to name me. My mom named my brother. He named me Angela after Angela Davis. And I think that in his mind, that would mean that I would never steer clear from um, what it means to advance and call for the collective liberation of Black people, and really all oppressed people. And I think I work hard at doing that, but in a way that is remarkably different for both of them. I knew at a very young age that I wanted to either be a lawyer or a librarian. Librarian is how I spelled it in my Cabbage Patch Kids scrapbook. And lawyer, I spelled Loyer. But I wanted to do one of them because my voice had never been silenced. I encourage parents everywhere to make sure that you always let kids have their voice, because there they can shape their identity, their thoughts, their leadership skills, their communication skills, and definitely negotiation skills. But I always had, I felt called to do something. I think that that comes directly from my parents being called and being obedient to the calls on their lives. So I just didn't know any other way. I also think that while I've always been pretty goofy and silly, I've also always been serious about Black folks and what is right. And that started in school. You know, if there was something that wasn't right, if there was a history lesson we were learning, it was wrong, I was going to be the student that said, this is not right, Miss So-and-so or Mr. So-and-so. Ouch, I just hit my knee. Yeah, so I don't know. But one thing I do think is really important for this audience to know is that we are never our titles, that we are so much broader and bigger and more remarkable than our titles. And I think for me, I really learned that lesson coming out of CNN, because I already was who I was when I got a political commentator contract. I was already that girl. I was already that person, which is how I got that contract. A lot of young people will say, oh, I want to be a commentator. How do you do that? I'm like, well, what job experience do you have? You know, what is the thing that makes you hireable in this space because you've done it and you did it different than anybody else? So I'd already had that. And I had that because there were so many Black folks who poured into me from a young age, but also in my career. I've never had a white boss. I mean, arguably now you could say, okay, well, you've had clients who you've worked for that are, or who are white, but I have never worked at an entity where I had a white boss. God knew that I would need to be insulated in this way by our folks. And I thank God for it, because it has given me a point of privilege to know how to work in and on behalf of our people. It has made me double down and be bold in ways where some of my counterparts and peers don't feel comfortable doing that. But God knew that I would need that I would need a Leslie Baskerville at NAFIO, that I would need a Congresswoman Waters before her for an internship. You were talking about only 57 Black women in Congress. It's probably because they couldn't have handled anymore, but they coming, you know, and these women strike a mighty, mighty blow, as Mary McLeod Bethune once said, that God knew that I would need a Congressman Emanuel Cleaver who was much kinder. It took a more meek approach, but that's because being born on the same day, he knew what it was like to have flashes of anger and have an outburst and say the thing. But now he knows how to temper it. God knew that I would need Benny Gordon Thompson on the Homeland Security Committee, who regularly would remind me that I was so lucky because I was paid to help Black folks. And even though that wasn't the direct mission of the committee, what was always and is always his mission is democratizing access and ensuring equitable access to federal government entities. And so, of course, that was going to help. That was going to be a part of my job. So I have been so fortunate to be surrounded by a village personally, professionally, spiritually, and it has been uniquely Black and divine in that way. And so I would say I am my people. I wear this Harriet necklace. I am um someone who I hope to help now. I hope to help navigate folks on our overground railroad, one that can be remarkably visible and clear. That our freedom is ours. It has always been ours. It is our divine birthright. And I would just want to be a part of ensuring that happens in my lifetime.
I think it's amazing that you're named after Angela Davis and your dad
Yes,
named you that. I always say, be careful what you name your children because it's always like, you
that's right.
know, their personality. My full name means the whole world. I was named after Jahan Sadat. So sometimes I'm like, this is why I'm so ambitious. This is
Mm.
your fault. Like, and it also means the whole world. So I always, it's interesting when I find out why people are named, why they're named, and then when I see their personalities, I'm like, aha, it
Yeah.
makes sense. So shout out to Dad, he did the right thing by naming you that.
Yes.
No, you didn't spell it right. You spelled it Lo, I think Wyer. You're trying to just,
Loyer. Do you one worse? Loyer.
but ultimately, you did choose, librarian over a lawyer. Why is that? Why did ultimately you say, I'm gonna go down the law school path?
Hmm. I think it was just I don't even feel like I chose it. I feel like it chose me. I feel like it was very, very clear that this was the path that I wanted to pursue. Before I even knew of like the quote from Charles Hamilton Houston, it was clear to me that I would that I felt a call to being a social engineer and not a parasite on society. I wanted to when I was a little kid, we used to have the family court shows and divorce court. I would be watching those shows religiously that did not have attorneys on them, but nevertheless, it was a courtroom, just the judge. And then I feel like when the OJ trial took place, I was in, I think it was my freshman year in high school. I'm pretty sure. Yeah, it was my freshman year in high school because I still had a beeper, a pager. And when we were waiting for the verdict, I told my dad to page me, page me these numbers if it's a yes and he's going to jail, or page me this if it's a no and he's not guilty. And OJ was acquitted. I went to a mostly white girls private high school, and I'd like cheered, and it was not cheering for OJ. Like, I'm clear about, I'm not black, I'm OJ, I know, but I was cheering for Johnnie Cochran and the dream team that included Sean Chapman Holly, who's become a mentor and a big sister to me, and Carl Douglas, who is a legend. And so I was cheering for them because the victory was theirs. Also, I did not know and did not believe at the time that OJ committed the murder because clearly the glove didn't fit. Maybe his fingers were spread out too much. I don't know. But I was like, I'm ready to be Johnnie Cochran. I am now you. So I was telling you earlier that Johnnie Cochran book is up there. And I studied Johnnie Cochran. I studied, how he was, what made him choose the cases he chose, like what made him choose the causes he chose. And even though I ultimately ended up not going into the courtroom in that way, I ended up going to Capitol Hill at the urging of Congressman Waters. I still feel like every day I will use a Johnnie Cochran advocacy strategy. I interviewed with his firm and I did end up getting an offer with them my last year in law school while I was NABALSA's Western Region chair. And I remember in the interview, an attorney there showing me their business card and saying, do you know why our cards say um, counselor at law and not attorney at law? And I was like, no, why? It was a very memorable moment. And they said, as Black lawyers, our responsibility goes so much further than beyond that case and beyond that courtroom and that trial. It really is. We have a holistic duty to make sure that we get our clients through the entire process. And so I've always strived to be a counselor at law, working to ensure that I'm serving my people from A to Z. So even with what we just went through with Marilyn Mosby, when I said, okay, sis, I'm signing up to support you through this, it was from, what we're wearing to what we're saying to who we're getting on board on this to where there may have been some things we can fix that happened that shouldn't have happened in the trial, to, you know, what we're calling for in terms of a presidential pardon. So using advocacy and communication and negotiation, and I mean, like in coalition building and collaboration to get it to the finish line. That is a counselor at law. That is what it takes. And I think what is even greater is the collaborative efforts are who our people are. Like, we don't know any other way but to work together. At our core, like when we are working from a very healed place, at our core, we don't know any other way but to work together. That is the best possible outcome. Black folks embody interdependence. And so to me, that is really what it's about. A counselor is a convener. A counselor is a collaborator. A counselor is a coalition builder. A counselor is an incredibly important and good communicator, you know, and a strong advocate. And to me, that is what it's about. And you don't leave the client however broken they came. You try to ensure that you're also rebuilding that person when the system tries to destroy them. You are working to remind them of who they are.
Absolutely. Well, you did go to law school. Remind me of your law school again.
I went to Seattle U.
Seattle U. What was your favorite law school class, and maybe like the best moment you can maybe recall while you were in law school?
Yeah, so this is a tie. I had my evidence professor, Professor John Mitchell, was incredible. And in law school, that was a second year course for me. In law school, I felt like I was lost, swimming, and confused my entire first year. I was like, what is happening and why? Like, what are we talking about? I'm learning in property about adverse possession. So white people created a law so they could steal somebody's land. Like, what is actually happening here and why did I choose this?
Yeah.
And so we got to evidence. Professor Mitchell just made everything so common sense. Like, he believed that you don't have to complicate this to prove you smart. Like, I'm actually smart. If I can break this down to you, you can get it from here and go apply it. And it was an incredible class because he did not work to confuse you. I would also say I had another favorite class, and this is why I was a tie, because it was the drama of it all for me. There's a professor, David Scover, who taught con law, and my con law professor he always brought the drama with the case, and it was so entertaining. Like, I was like, I am soaking up every minute of this with him. So
Yeah.
con law was never boring, and so I think I performed the best in those classes because I just felt met. Whereas in my first year, civil procedure, like, why did we spend 5 weeks on Rule 11 and all of its amendments? What's the one we applying right now? Like, what are we talking? What are we talking about? And then I remember my contracts class, instead of leading with an offer and then acceptance, we started with consideration, and we spent a considerable amount of time on consideration. And I think when you go into a negotiation for a client, that's not what you're leading with. You're leading with, was there an offer? Was there an acceptance? And now, you know, consideration applies. Was there consideration? But to start there, I was just like, oh, y'all just trying to mess me up for no reason. Like, what's happening? So I didn't understand what's going on until I went to go summer my first year. But con law and evidence were by far my favorites. I learned how to write in legal writing, though. I didn't know how to write until I finished law school, and it was because of legal writing. Mimi Samuel, there's so many incredible legal writing professors who, yeah, I've learned how to write in law school.
It's funny when you were breaking down contracts in terms of like starting off with consideration. The first thing, here's a quick bar tip for people who are going to take the bar exam in a few weeks. TACO, terms, acceptance, consideration, offer. If you want to remember that quickly, TACO, if you haven't learned that yet. So that was like the first thing that came to mind when I
Yeah.
was trying to remember.
It's
But
like,
you're
what are
right.
we talking about?
Oh, why would you start with consideration? That would be a little confusing. I don't think my law
I don't know why. One day, if I ever see him, I can't even remember his name, but if I ever see him, I'm gonna be like, what were you doing? Why did you do that?
Oh gosh.
I did ask my civil procedure professor, Annette Clark, who ended up being the dean of the law school for a while. Why did we spend so much time on Rule 11? Like, what? And in her mind, she was saying that that was teaching us legal analysis. You know, like, and I get it now, but I'm like, even if you would have started with that, like, I'm gonna walk y'all through this. This isn't what the rules of civil procedure are. Like, there are some very basic things like your pleadings and how you do, but we're going to start here because I want you to understand how to apply these rules and how to argue this particular rule if you need to. I get it, but I wish we would have started a little lighter.
Absolutely.
Like, what is a pleading?
Right. Let's start with the basics.
Just to
Well,
start with a pleading.
you did mention that you're the chair of BASA, which I think is amazing, the Black Law Student Association. If you're listening, that's what BASA stands for. So you
The
found
Western region. I don't want people to think I'm trying to engage in revisionist history. So was Kamala Harris, though. Shout out to our Madam Vice
okay,
President.
okay. Well, I think that speaks to what you were saying at the top of the interview about making sure you find your people, you find your tribe, and you know, when you go to law school, for the most part, you are the minority walking into a law school class. Was there ever a moment where you felt discrimination? Maybe you felt like maybe if you were maybe white or male, you would have been treated differently.
Yes, I think I believe that a lot of our organizations on campus um didn't have to fight for funding the way that we did. And this again is an, you know, an age-old thing. You look at our civil rights orgs, our nonprofit organizations, our social justice orgs, the amount of scrapping that you have to do just to make ends meet is crazy. And so I remember you know, having pretty intense conversations and debates with the dean, one of the deans, about funding our travel to the national convention, which was a game changer. Like, I can absolutely assure you, if I didn't have a national experience with BALSA, I would not be where I am. And you would think, like, you want to bring um um you want to bring a certain amount of attention, like the right kind of attention to the school, notoriety to the school. You want to make it attractive to people who will go there. That increases your rankings. Those are the things they care about. So you would think that they would want to meet folks where they are and pay the couple $1,000s to get our kids to go to the conference. And so you just saw the kind of the disparities there in terms of um overt discrimination, like from a professor or um you know, from a student. Not really. You know, not anything to write home about, not anything that I remember. I think that I was very fortunate to be at SU. I felt really protected and insulated and cared for. We had a Black dean at the time, Dean Deming, who was on the team, who just looked out. Like, if I had a complaint, she would listen to my complaint. She would might tell me to get over it one day. Another day, she'd be like, "I hear you. I'm gonna go fight on this thing." But she was incredible. And what I love most about SU is we had a faculty and staff who was not afraid to also learn from the students. And that made it that much easier to learn from them. My year, I think my second year, we had 2 Black professors come in. And before that, we didn't have any. Christian Halliburton and Natasha Martin, who I'm still very close to and adore. It made a difference to see ourselves reflected in those classrooms. You know, like, we were running to go, like, oh, we got Black professors now, bad, I'm going to take some Black professors. And she did employment discrimination, and Christian Halliburton taught criminal procedure, but they were extraordinary. So it was I think I was very spoiled in that, and protected in that there wasn't overt discrimination at the school.
Oh, that's amazing. I'm glad that that was your experience. And obviously, we want people to have more experiences where they feel like when they go to law school, there's a place in the school where they belong and they are protected and they're able to get their education. Well, speeding a few years ahead.
I was also very connected to the community. So, like, if it was going to be any type of discrimination, my dad, just like in high school, he set up a African American Parents Association. His butt would have been right there. Like, where's the protest? I heard we needed a protest. What's going on? So even if there was going to be a thing, I was never going to be alone. Like, this a village that come with me. We'd be right out there, like that Malcolm X scene where the whole FOI is outside. Like, what
Oh
are we
my
doing?
God.
Let's go. You
I
know.
love you. I love your dad. I always want to interview your dad now. He's like such a
Oh,
character.
he is a riot. You should. He's a whole walking TV show, even when he's not trying.
No, I love that, but I love how he stands up and he protects you. You
For
speed a few
sure.
years past law school and you become what they call the truth bringer in chief.
Truth bringer in chief. That's what my name means. Angela means bringer of truth or truth bringer or messenger of God. That's what it means.
Okay, so we were wondering, like, where did it come from? But it's so fitting with who you became as an advocate and strategist and things like that. So obviously you did, you didn't do a lot of, practicing at a big firm or in a courtroom. That wasn't your path. Um, you mentioned Representative Waters, who I believe, yeah, she was our inaugural, not our inaugural, she was our first guest on the podcast. Um, what made you decide, okay, well, I'm not going to necessarily like practice traditionally. I'm going to go down this path of being on the Hill and doing it more the political way, which obviously eventually turned into you being a commentator and a strategist.
Well, the biggest thing was, I think I mentioned my last year in law school, I got an offer from the Cochran firm. But also my last year in law school, my second semester, um, so my last semester, Johnny Cochran died. And Congresswoman Waters was coming to our NABASA conference to speak. I was introducing her. They were actually friends. She was friends with Johnny Cochran. And I went up to her and I was like, Congresswoman, Johnny Cochran died. What am I going to do now? Like, I was supposed to go to work at the firm. Like, I don't want to go. I think, maybe the firm will fall apart. I don't know. And she was like, well, I told you to go to the Hill. I think you should go to the Hill. And so I was like, I really loved, like, I fell in love with politics in her office. Before that, I'd always seen politics on the other side of my dad. And so I hated it. But working for her, I was like, oh, there is a blend. There's a place where politics and activism can marry, and it's beautiful, and it actually works better on behalf of our folks. So I was like, okay, I'm gonna go, and I was looking up organizations that represented our interests on the Hill and otherwise. There's ACLU in some ways. There's NAA. There's NAACP-LDF. There's NAFIO, which I stumbled upon. And I was like, wow, this National Association for Equal Opportunity in Higher Education represents the interests of historically and predominantly Black institutions on Capitol Hill. Like, I want to do this. So, me being the ambitious person I am, applied for a vice president role, fresh out of law school, sent in a cover letter, like, sent in my resume, like, what's good? And what's crazy is I went to DC, to the DC area right when I was studying for the bar. And I was walking down a street and I saw Dr. Leslie Baskerville, who ran the organization. We had never met, but I saw her and I knew her. And I was like, Dr. Baskerville. And she was like, yes. I was like, hi, my name is Angela Rye. I applied for the vice president role of legislative affairs and advocacy. This sounded like such a cool job. And I was like, so I would love to interview with you. And she was like, oh, tell me about your experience. I was like, well, I just graduated from law school. I'm studying for the bar. She was like, I might have a role for you, but it probably won't be a vice president. She's like, maybe like a coordinator role. And I was like, okay. So we like talk about it. And she ended up hiring me, but that was a divine appointment. And that is how I ended up getting there. The Republicans were in control of Congress at that time, but I started with her in 2005. By 2006, dang, it was that short. It must have been that short. The 2006 election. So the beginning of 2007, I went to the Hill, and I worked with Congressman Benny Gordon Thompson, who was the incoming chair, the first ever Black chair of the Homeland Security Committee. And the rest is history. I fell in love with the process. I loved every minute of working on Capitol Hill, my Hill family, the members who became like aunts, uncles, big brothers, and big sisters, friends. Just an incredible experience. And it taught me so much. NAFIO taught me first how to do a lot with less. The Hill taught me how to refine that hustle and be a better strategist and a communicator, and understanding that you don't burn the bridge, you got to cross later. So it was a remarkable experience that I highly encourage young people to engage in. I think, if I'm honest, I worry now about people going to the Hill because you have folks like where we started today, Marjorie Taylor Greene, who make that experience less precious, less sacred, um, less fun. I worked on the Hill at a time where we could negotiate across the aisle. We didn't agree most of the time, but we could at least have a civil conversation. And I think that Congressman Cleaver would argue in a lot of ways civility is dead. And so, how do you resurrect that? How do you bring it back when you had a president who worked overtime to trivialize that process? Who, to me, I felt like everything I worked for and fought for and learned was just gone, with the election of Donald Trump. So I am eager to see how young people can resurrect what its intention was for a building that our ancestors built. And we have every right to be present, not just in the halls working, but on the floor voting and in committee marking up bills and negotiating a better path for all of us. And the staffers who lead that in so many ways, who are often the unspoken, unseen heroes of it all. So it was a beautiful experience, and I don't regret the pivot from trial law to this, but maybe I'll find myself back in it now, at least working a little more closely with trial advocates on the crisis management side and working to ensure a better path for all of us.
It definitely comes all together. And I had a brief stint on the Hill with Senator Moynihan's office in high school. So that was one of, you go to DC schools, you get all these like cool opportunities. And so I did enjoy my time on the Hill. Um, you mentioned Donald Trump and civility. That was actually my next question. We do have an election coming up.
Mhm.
It's crazy how 4 years will just go by so fast.
Yeah.
What do you think is the biggest, because I feel like I'm always fighting with people in Instagram comments about this, but the biggest misconception about why there are some Black folks that, and again, they may not even necessarily be conservative, but why they feel like, oh, Donald Trump is still like our best option. And, you know, we got all this money during the pandemic, and I'm like, I think if there would have been any president, you probably would have got money. This wasn't like a Donald Trump thing. But what do you think? I mean, in addition to that misconception, what are some other misconceptions that maybe you can just quickly clear up right now about Donald Trump and Black folks saying, "Oh, I'm actually considering voting for him."
I think that the real question is, do you care about preserving a democracy that you feel um, like hasn't always served you, but maybe has the opportunity to get better? Do you want to see this country get better, or do you want to move towards a dictatorship? I think that's really where we are right now. Getting into the minutia about who Donald Trump is, I think, like, pull up my old clips. That stuff hasn't changed. He is exactly who he has always said he is. And I think that we would be foolish to believe any words that come out of his mouth when his actions are right there to tell you what it is. If you're confused about how well he served our community, go back and look at some of the bills he signed into law. And yeah, I would say any president would have ensured that an economy doesn't completely tank in the middle of a global pandemic. But look how long it took him to act. So yeah, I can't believe how much of my life now has been dedicated toward or to fighting back against white supremacy embodied in Donald Trump. Um, I have friends, personal friends, who have been personally attacked, called by name by this person who doesn't know anything but the abuse of power. And so I don't want anything to do with that. I don't want that person to be representing me in the highest office of the land. I don't want the country to be represented by someone who's got a wounded ego and leads with that, sending us into all type of conflicts. Like, if we're clear about even what's happening in Gaza now, we know that as a result of Trump administration era policies. So I don't know. I think I've seen enough, and I would challenge us to figure out where that pain is coming from that would make us say, I'm gonna protest vote here, and I'm gonna do it even though it's against my interests. And I also understand the folks that say, well, the way that my interests should have been met in this administration, they haven't been. That is also true. Two things can be true, but you should still vote for what's better and not risk it all on somebody who's already told you who they are.
Yeah, I couldn't put it better myself, I think. You gotta choose the overall best choice. And yes, the election, as we get closer to election, will be obviously reminding people the election, but thank you for your thoughts on that. My final question kind of just relates to where you are in your journey now. I mean, obviously, as you said, attorney, commentary, strategist, things like that. You know, you have the Native Land podcast. That's something that's new that people can check out everywhere podcasts are obviously streaming. And prior to that, obviously, a lot of people know you from CNN. You know, you were one of the people I actually look forward to turning like, is she on today? You know, I looked forward to you being on CNN and giving your perspective and giving your opinion. And one of the things that you did talk about, kind of right at the beginning of even in the introduction of your Native Land podcast, is kind of like your exit from CNN and how people notice. I think I was one of the people like, oh, I noticed she's not really on CNN anymore, and how um, a lot of people just kind of wondered what happened with that. And you had addressed that at one point maybe you were being considered for doing something else for that particular network, and it didn't work out. And it was kind of in the midst of an inappropriate social media comment from another CNN commentator about like a bathing suit or something you wore, you notice kind of around that time, it whatever was going to happen in terms of additional programming for yourself, that didn't happen. And you took the time to speak up about that. Um, why now do you think it was important to reveal that that was part of your experience with CNN and in terms of your departure?
Yeah, I'm so sorry because this is something I've been really clear about. I addressed it one time on the podcast, and just even for my own traumatic reasons, I don't go back to revisit it. So I would say in brief, just to give honor to the fact that we probably didn't communicate that to you ahead of time. I think that it happens to women every day. The comment was not made on social media; it was made in a text message, a series of text messages to me that I still have. So yeah, I think that it happens every day, and sadly, we have to find ways to pivot. But thank God for his grace. I think that I pivoted okay.
Yeah, you did. And we're excited that you do have this new podcast. Obviously, have
Yeah,
already.
Native Land Pod. It drops every Thursday. I get to co-host it every week with Tiffany Cross and Andrew Gillum.
Mhm.
We tell people because we want to make sure we're creating a safe space. So even though we don't even say podcast, we say pod because we really want it to feel like a safe little bubble. So Native Land Pod is where we say welcome home, and we want people to feel home every time they tune in.
Well, we look forward to hearing obviously more of what you're doing with the podcast, everything you're doing for justice with Attorney Mosby. I mean, we're looking forward to everything that is next in terms of your journey. We end each podcast with a Black Excellence Moment of the Week because there's so much negative news. We try to find positive news to end the podcast with. So our Black Excellence Moment of the Week goes out to Prince George's County Executive Angela Alsobrooks, who has secured the Democratic Party nomination for the U.S. Senate. So she would be the first Black female U.S. senator if she were to secure the seat. And we already have
In
the Black
Maryland.
governor. Yes, yes. So that would be awesome if she were to able to win that seat. So we just want to give her a major shout out, and it's just a reminder. It's so funny sometimes when I see the first, when we're in 2024, you say, oh, this is the first Black or the first. I'm like, wow, we're still saying the first in
Mhm.
2024, but we wish her well on her campaign and her journey. And like I said, we have the upcoming election. And again, we appreciate you just taking the time to share the space. There's so many jewels and things I'm sure people can pull from this interview that will be inspiring. And again, we appreciate your time. And as always, we're rooting for everyone, Black everyone. Take care.